Today, let us continue our discussion on reading fill in the blanks, which is quite a challenge to many students. In fact, I'm going to make 2 walkthrough videos in quick succession instead of just one as I did for the other question types, which goes to show how much I value this opportunity to not only explain how to score high, but also to go through the grammar and vocab, something I think many students lack and is the primary bottleneck for them to get their desired score. A quick reminder of what you do. A short passage will have some blanks in it, and the removed words will form a combined pool along with some false options added to it. Your job is to drag the words into the corresponding blanks, knowing that all words can only be used once, and fitting a correct word into a wrong blank will be a very costly mistake. The major tools you have at your disposal are structural analysis, which tells you what kind of a word goes into each blank. Suffixes, which provides useful insight about the parts of speech of the words in the pool, and common expressions, which occasionally come into play, but it will pretty much guarantee the point if it does. An ideal time allocation will be somewhere around 2.5 minutes. Again, talking averages here. With all that in mind, let's move on to the very first sample question of today. By now, you should know the routine very well. We will start by looking at each blank and determining the required parts of speech. For the first blank, there are a few clues. The first clue is that everything in the quotation marks are parallel to the word Bonakai, whatever that means. We know that, however, there's another word various in front of it, which you should be able to tell is an adjective. Therefore, Bonakai must be a noun. The things that we can see in the quotation marks are connected via hyphens, suggesting that they are used as a part of speech which the words themselves are not intended for. In this specific case, we should note that the first blank needs to be a noun, and forget the year is hyphenated to show that it is used as an adjective, even though none of these 3 words are. A second clue is the fact that the blank is followed by are held, which is a passive voice, but more importantly, it tells you that the blank needs to be plural due to the are. Very intuitive indeed that we need a plural noun for the first blank. What about the second blank? Here's another parallelism, and whenever you run into structures like that, you need to first figure out what terms are being parallelized. It's quite straightforward to see that the second blank is parallel to the single word problems, as they are both within the same prepositional phrase. A further observation is that problems is plural, so whatever you fit into the blanks also has to be plural, but we are not done. Since these words are connected via and, you can come to the conclusion that the word you fit into the second blank should have somewhat of a resemblance to problems, so they should have something in common like their meaning, tone, or general idea. The third blank is also within a parallelism, but this time it's quite difficult to see what it is parallel to. The big clue here is that to the problems and ... of the past year is a complete thing with 2 prepositional phrases along with a parallelism. If you fit a noun into the third blank, it has to be somewhat close to problems, or whatever word you decide to put into the second blank. This is quite unlikely because of the past year and for a new beginning somewhat contradict with each other, so they are probably not being parallelized here, and something else is parallel to the third blank. Another possibility here is that you can put in a verb, and in this case the word will be in parallel with bid, suggesting that it's in the original form and it's a plural verb. If that were to be true, then we can say one more thing about this particular verb. It is being used as an intransitive verb. Most verbs can be categorized as either transitive or intransitive, with some words usable as both. A transitive verb will need to have a direct object, while an intransitive verb needs a preposition used with it. A very good example would be the words see and look. You can see someone, but you will have to look at someone, look for someone, look after someone, etc. Therefore, see is a transitive verb, while look is intransitive. This is also what you might see in a dictionary, where words are marked as VI or VT, dictating whether they are transitive or not. The fourth blank is quite simple. It is followed by strike their gongs. Whatever a gong is, since it has there before it, it has to be a noun. Strike has to be the predicate here, or else the sentence doesn't have one. Therefore, the fourth blank has to be a noun, and due to the fact that we have strike instead of strikes, the subject here is plural, so we're looking for a plural noun. The last blank is within a new kind of structure. It's called an infinitive, which follows this general form, to do something. It has to begin with the preposition to, and this is the only situation which allows for a verb in its original form within a prepositional phrase. Types is a noun, which is quite clear since it is after the determiner 108. As a result, we need a verb in its original form, and it has to be plural, which is a must for an infinitive. Time to go through the word list and to see what parts of speech they have. The first word is augment, which is somewhat of a slap in my face. In the crash course, I said most words with the suffix ment are nouns, and this word is an exception. It is somewhat related to the pronunciation, for which you can notice the stress is on ment, and this is a common characteristic for verbs with 2 syllables. A noun with 2 syllables, on the other hand, usually have the stress at the front, with examples like address as a noun and address as a verb. There's really no good way to prevent this from ever happening, but the general rule of thumb is still valid. Here, however, it is a verb, and its noun form is augmentation. Be familiar with the rules and then learn what the exceptions are, and this is, in my opinion, the best way to improve in English. The second word is concerns, which can either be a third-person singular verb or a plural noun. Let's speed up the process and just say that areas, temples, and parties are all plural nouns. Then you have the words expel, prepare, and foresee, all with 2 syllables and all with the stress on the second syllable. Can you see where this is going? Yep, all of them are verbs. Expel and prepare should be something most of you know, and it is quite easy to guess the meaning of foresee. The prefix for means forward, as in forward. Seeing something forward is precisely what the word means, to predict the future or to have a vision of something happening in the future. Let's look at the blanks 1, 2, and 4 because they all need a plural noun. It should be quite clear that concerns fits in the second blank as it nicely correlates to problems, and temples should go to the fourth blank because the phrase Buddhist temples makes a lot of sense. Then you are down to parties and areas for the first blank. One clue is that held is the passive for hold. You can't really hold an area, can you? So the correct answer here has to be parties. As for blanks 3 and 5, we need 2 verbs among the remaining 4 words in the pool. Furthermore, we can say that blank 2 needs an intransitive verb, and blank 4 needs a transitive verb. If this isn't something that you actively pay attention to, it would be quite difficult to tell them apart, especially during the test. Among the 4 words, only prepare can be used both transitively and intransitively, so it goes to the second blank. Prepare for is also a very common expression, which you should have come across many times. Finally, we're down to 3 words for blank 5. The next logical deduction would probably be for you to see that foresee doesn't fit the meaning of the context. The 108 types of human weakness seem to be something people know about, so it's not something we have to look into the future to see. I honestly didn't know that we have that many, but whatever. And then you will probably have to tell me that expel fits the meaning and augment doesn't. To augment something means you are improving it, making it stronger, so not the right pick here. As for expel, it should be a word that you have heard in school, referring to some students have such bad behavior that they have to be expelled or removed from the school. There you go, that's the first question. Here comes the second one. Once again, most questions will probably have more blanks and more words in the pool. This passage is also a very good example of why you don't need to read or understand the whole thing. If you think I know what If you think I know what haute couture means, you will be very, very wrong. Like, the pronunciation makes no sense, but it's French, so of course it doesn't. Looking at the first blank, we see an interesting structure. It is led by is. Whatever you see a be, and here is the third-person singular variant of be, you have 3 things to look out for. It can either be an adjective as in he is tall, a present or past part to show tenses or a passive voice, or a noun. In this situation, it probably isn't a noun because is suggests that it is singular if you have a noun behind it, but it doesn't have a determiner, which is oftentimes a problem. The second blank should be very simple. You have the auxiliary verb must, which is always followed by a verb in its original form. It can't be continuous, perfect, or passive because then you will have other auxiliary verbs present. The third blank will be a singular noun given by the determiner each. End of story. Looking at the words in the pool, a quick glance will tell you that it doesn't have an adjective, and regulated is the only past part. Therefore, it goes in the first blank without the need of further consideration. It has to be correct. Presentation and inspiration both end with shun, which tells you they are very likely nouns, and indeed they are. The rest of the words deploy, endorse, and employ are all verbs. Employ is a very common word, so you shouldn't have any trouble deciding that. What about deploy? We have briefly mentioned before that the prefixes usually don't change the part of speech, so if employ is a verb, then deploy is likely a verb as well. What clues do you have with endorse? Well, it's got 2 syllables with a stress on the second one. This trick is becoming more useful and robust by the minute, don't you think? The second blank needs a verb, and we have 3 options. Seeing that we are dealing with people, it would be quite reasonable for you to assume that employ is the correct answer. Sure, it is safer if you know what deploy and endorse mean, but if you don't, then that's the best hint you got. To endorse something or someone means to provide support, but this is oftentimes used in a context involving payment or money. Deploy is usually used when talking troops or the military. If you deploy someone or something, you send them into position for military purposes. In a way, it's like the opposite of employing someone. You offer people a position within your company and you deploy someone to occupy a position outside. It's a nice way for you to memorize the words using the ones you already know, which is quite a bit more effective. Last blank should be presentation instead of inspiration. Simple answer. Going through the passage, you can see the word present in the previous sense. If that wasn't obvious enough, the inspiration is a sudden burst of ideas or feelings one gets from stimulation, so it makes no sense for you to only be inspired with more than 35 outfits, but not less. Meanwhile, presentation fits perfectly here. Third question coming right up. It's our old friend Julius Caesar again. Don't be too surprised if you come across William Shakespeare again in other questions as well. First blank needs a noun. Fight me if you disagree. The next blank is quite interesting. It seems like it should be an adjective, but since Ides of March is in quotation, there's the possibility that the second blank can be a noun, and the quotation is making a reference to it, which is structurally viable. Be careful with these things because you will have to rely on meaning and reading comprehension a lot more to make the correct decision. The third blank is quite weird. One observation you might have is that if you remove the blank completely, this sentence seems to hold. You can't put in an adjective or a noun, so that leaves you with only one option. It has to be an adverb. In many situations, if you have a word that seems to be the outlier within the structure, it's probably an adverb. They don't come into play as frequently as adjectives, nouns, or verbs, but you must know how to recognize them when they do. As for the last blank, it should be quite clear that it is a plural noun. It is at the beginning of the sentence. Well, technically you have a bunch of stuff before the blank, but they are short phrases and not the main structure, so you need a noun to properly initiate this sentence. Time to go over the pool of words. Audiences and celebrities are the only plural nouns, so one of them goes into the fourth blank. Obviously and simply are adverbs, and one of them is the correct answer for the third blank. Expression, foreboding, and relief are all singular nouns, or they might be uncountable, but no need to fuss over the terminologies. It should be quite obvious that expression fits in the second blank, going nicely with the quotation right after it. As for the third blank, simply is more suitable than obviously. The passage was saying that the Ides of March is something you should look out for, but then it goes on to explain that it was simply a way of saying March 15th, which makes perfect sense. For the fourth blank, I don't think you need to be a celebrity to watch Shakespeare's plays, so audiences is the correct answer. Going back to the first blank, we're looking for a word with a negative tone to fit the context. Even if you don't know what foreboding means, you should be able to see that all other words don't have a negative tone. Therefore, the correct word for the first blank is precisely foreboding. It means to have a feeling that something bad will happen, exactly what we need for this blank. Here comes the last question for today. As always, let's go through the blanks first. The first blank can be quite tricky if you don't know what per capita is, but you can safely assume that it's a noun at the very end of the sentence because you don't have any adverbs in the pool. By the way, per capita is a fancy way of saying per person. My way of memorizing this word is like this. Decapitation means chopping off one's head, so capita means head. Says quite a bit about who I am as a person, don't you agree? The second blank is right before quality, which is usually used as a noun, so you need an adjective. The third blank is right after is and before a cross, which is a preposition. You can have a present or past part here for the verb tense, or you might have an adjective. Some say they are more or less the same thing here. It just depends on the specific word you choose to use. That person may or may not be me, but I suggest that you listen to him. The fourth blank is a noun because of the preposition for. You know what, let's not beat around the bush here. It has to be example. If you don't know what for example is, you might want to go back and start with ABCs. This goes to show that some blanks are indeed extremely easy, and the techniques we use can make more blanks extremely easy if you utilize them to their fullest potential. The fifth blank needs to be a noun because you have the article the, and afterwards it has moved on to a prepositional phrase. Also, you can tell from the verb is that the blank needs to be a singular noun. This is a rule that is loosely followed in verbal English, but more strictly in written English. Technically, the verbs should be looking at the subject, and prepositional phrases, as we have talked about countless times before, are not considered to be a part of the subject. It's not something you should worry too much about, but it's good knowledge to have. Moving on to the list of words, incidents, effects, income, and expenditure are all nouns. Average can either be an adjective or a noun. Distributed and lessened can be verbs with the past tense or past part, but since we don't need past tenses for any of the blanks, they are past parts, which can also be used in place of adjectives. Good stuff. Let's start with the second blank, which we know for sure is an adjective. We can eliminate the past parts because their meanings don't match the context. Average quality of life makes a lot of sense. Knowing that the only adjective is being used, we can then come to the conclusion that a past part fits in the third blank. The income is either distributed or lessened. I'd say distributed seems to be the better pick here because nothing in the passage says anything about people's income being lessened, or to put simply, decreased. Going back to the first blank, we're looking for a noun, but it has to be something that can be measured per head. Per capita. Same thing. It shouldn't be a problem for you guys to see that income is the correct answer. In that case, effects would not be the correct answer for any of the blanks, simply because you need a singular noun for the last one. You will have to pick among incidents and expenditure. Without knowing their meanings, you will probably just have to make a guess, but the other four blanks should be quite straightforward. Something to note here. Some students tell me that they know what incidents means, but, well, they don't. The common definition they give is as follows: it's an event. This is not the right meaning. In fact, it's the meaning of incident, which is quite similar but with some major differences. An incident is referring to how common or how many an incident occurs, so it has an implied focus on the rate or chance of such incidents repeating. It doesn't matter too much here. It's probably easier to explain that expenditure means spending money on stuff, and you just have to see that it doesn't fit here, so you're left with incidents. That'll be all for today. As I mentioned in the beginning, I plan on making another walkthrough on reading filling the blanks real soon, if not right away after this one. This is a question type that I genuinely believe you guys will get better at if you follow the train of thought and go through more practice. The rules and concepts I use for making these decisions will force you to think within the English context, instead of translating everything back to your native language and then interpret the meaning, which will most likely lead to errors and misunderstandings. It might seem difficult in the beginning, but it will definitely pay off in the long term. Hope you find this helpful, and please like, subscribe, and share so more can learn about these awesome techniques. Man, these tests are being cancelled again due to COVID, so please do me a favor and just practice social distancing and wear a mask if you have to go out. Dude's really worried about his life here, man. Stay safe and best of luck, and I'll see y'all next time.